All right, so we're going to get started at 7 o'clock. So I'll start with the statement of acknowledgement. We'd like to acknowledge that this lands that we meet on today is the traditional lands of the Kaurna people and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. Roll call, we have an apology from Deputy Mayor Shanks and I think an apology from Councillor Solomon, and everyone else is here. Do we have any motions to grant leave of absence? None and no leave of absence, no non-attendance. Public open forum, we did have a request from Grazio, who I saw about 30 seconds ago peeking into the door. All right. All good. This is Grazio from URPS. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Committee Chair, elected members, thank you for the opportunity to address the ESI Committee. I'm Eka Grazio Majorana, Town Planner from URPS. With me is Martin Bateman, the owner of the land and the proponent of the Victory Rezoning project. I wouldn't mind 5 to 7 minutes, if you don't mind, just to respond to the council item 6.4, Hillier Residential Park, in your agenda papers. In respect to the agenda documents, they're fairly comprehensive, and we actually appreciate that. However, we note that the most recent, our most recent letter dated the 12th of October 2023 and our associated terms of agreement was not included in the agenda. This letter explains our position on what should have been included in the draft LMA prepared by Council's lawyers. Having said that, I acknowledge that was forwarded to Council's lawyers, and they have provided their comments on our draft terms of agreement and our actual letter. Background to the project, which might be of interest to elected members. The Minister for Planning approved the proposal to initiate a code amendment in October 2022. The proposal to initiate is a term or title to like a document which essentially starts the first stage of the rezoning process, of the code amendment process. So that was approved in 2022. The proposed rezoning seeks to rezone some 23 hectares of land to rural to residential park zone, similar zone to the land to the east. We anticipate that the development, once the rezoning is approved and subject to the council assessment of a development application post rezoning, will accommodate around 380 new homes on the proposed rezoning area. As many councillors will know, that your residential park provides quality, affordable accommodation for people over 50. In fact, almost 60% of people in the park are women with an average age of 75. So from our perspective, it's an important facility for the provision of affordable homes for senior citizens. We've been working closely with council staff and the community in the preparation of the rezoning document. This has involved significant community engagement and actually 3 on-site community meetings. We originally proposed only 1 meeting and a fairly detailed letter drop proposal and preparation of fact sheets. But in a response to Otsuka community questions, we undertook another two voluntary engagement processes. And we're also thankful of council staff in that they've been approachable and been available during various discussions about infrastructure negotiations, and which involved our engineers and councils. And that leads us to the key point with respect to infrastructure and mainly stormwater discussion, which the draft LMA, which is attached to your agenda paper, seeks to address. We think we all agree that the planning policy issues have been resolved. So the code, like your rezoning contents, we're on the same page. The key outstanding issues relate to infrastructure, including how we manage and fund stormwater infrastructure. And I don't think that we're necessarily far apart in actually getting to a mutually acceptable outcome. But for context, we would like to present that we need to acknowledge certain factors in respect to infrastructure funding for this particular rezoning. The actual approval from the Minister for Planning to begin the rezoning process, that's that document I mentioned in October 2022, that approval was not associated with any conditions relating to the need to enter into infrastructure agreements with council. This was not an oversight from the Minister. Therefore, all infrastructure negotiations and works, which Martin has agreed to many, from a ministerial letter perspective and code amendment perspective, are voluntary contributions. Martin could have gone to the Minister and to the department and said, I acknowledge council's desire for contributions to infrastructure, but the Minister doesn't require me to do that. He hasn't done that. From the outset, Martin has been very keen and URPS have been very keen to work with council to achieve a fair and reasonable outcome. Infrastructure agreements, or infrastructure which have been agreed to, include an upgrade to the access point of Hillier Road to get better service at your residential park, and that's required as a result of the development of the residential park. Contribution of 50% funding to a Hillier Road footpath, not the 100% as noted in the draft council land management agreement prepared by lawyers. Martin's also providing a council with a right-of-way at no cost to council for the Gawler River pedestrian path. I'm so sorry. And also a contribution to the path. Now these contributions tally several dollars. I won't quote the actual figure here because they do vary based on actual costings. I also acknowledge council staff have been flexible in their negotiations with infrastructure agreements, with what's out and what's in. The other point to understand within context of infrastructure negotiations is that Martin, or the residential park, contributes around $170,000 in council rates. That's based on the existing development. The new residential park, when it's fully developed, will result in an additional approximately $300,000 in actual rates, totaling in total annual rate bill of about $470,000. That's annually. So that's a reasonable rate. This is based on our calculations on current capital valuations and not indexed. Stormwater. Ultimately, council is seeking a stormwater solution which will provide excess stormwater via a wet system to the reserve, to Carr Beefin Reserve. We have always agreed in actual principle to that concept. There is no disagreement with the with the concept of actually providing water which is collected from Martin's land to be diverted to the reserve to support the broader community benefits and environmental benefits. But what we've been suggesting is that solution must not be cost prohibitive to the residential park, given it's essentially an affordable housing product. And it should not compromise the design aspects of the residential park. Originally there were two options, one option presented by council and another option presented by our engineers from Fife. Fife informs us that there's a cost difference in excess of $2 million in the stormwater solution. And I acknowledge that the council has issues with some of the costings of Fife, and we haven't landed on fully agreement with what the engineers, councils and engineers have suggested. Then there may be a middle ground there, and we're more than happy to explore that. The issue with the draft LMA is that Martin could be left as currently drafted, Martin could be left in a situation in that if council does not develop the reserve in a timely manner, for whatever reason, perhaps reasons out of council's control, Martin will not be able to develop the land for affordable housing. We want to retain the existing development right, which any landowner has within the appropriate zone, that soon after the land is actually rezoned, if for some reason a stormwater solution cannot be found which is mutually acceptable to both parties, that we will rely on the policies within the Planning and Design Code.
So if you can wrap up.
Thank you. 2 minutes, if you don't mind, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. So as Council will appreciate, once the land is actually rezoned, an application needs to be submitted back to Council for the development proposal. And Council is the planning authority, or Council's independent panel is the authority. And that application will need to be judged against the policies in the Planning and Design Code, include water-sensitive urban design policies and stormwater management policies. So there is a process to actually manage that outcome. Having said that, in good faith, we are keen to work on a mutually acceptable stormwater solution, but we don't want to be locked in our view, potentially unfairly. The LMA, the draft LMA, also has removed the financial caps. So we've been negotiating on good faith with Council based on what we understood the financial contribution would be. Council's lawyers have removed that. So now we don't really know what the end dollar value could be. So we don't have any objections in principle to the concept of an LMA. Martin has already agreed to the voluntary contributions, and I say voluntary in terms that there's no requirement from the planning minister to do so, who's ultimately the final decision maker. We are concerned that in our opinion, as the LMA is currently drafted, it's not fair and actually balanced in respect to what are the costs and achieving a mutually acceptable outcome. Again, I emphasise in extra closing that we are keen to continue to work with Council and achieve a fair and reasonable infrastructure agreement and LMA process. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Mayor?
How many properties are in the existing development?
385.
Any other questions? If not, thanks for your presentation. We will move on to declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? If not, we'll move on to business arising from the minutes. Do we have any questions about those? If not, we'll move on to decision reports. 6.1, Gawler Town Centre Design Framework Update and Scoping. Andrew, did you have a presentation for this one? Go ahead.
Thank you. During this, I might get Wendy to come up. In fact, if you want Wendy, for ease of convenience, I might get you to sit right next to me. So when the hard questions start flying, you can start answering them for me. Joking. I might do a bit of a joint presentation on this one. Particularly given, to be fair, Wendy delivered all the capital works and therefore she should be speaking to that more than me. Briefly, because it's all covered in the report, this is just a bit of a cook's tour quickly of the report, so you don't have to spend hours reading 30 pages of what I've written down. What is the UDF? Why is it important? What's been achieved? There's, I guess, a logical sequence to this. The criticism of council shouldn't be that it hasn't delivered a lot, because in fact council has done a lot through Wendy's team, but we probably haven't necessarily sold it in terms of what we delivered on the ground, which has been significant, and I think Wendy's team deserves a lot of credit for that, but we'll go into that. I guess also, given the gap in time since we've perhaps reported on this, which is some time, it's timely to look at how this relates to other strategic work we've been doing, observations and next steps. I suppose the synthesis of the report is that we've gone somewhere down the journey, but we haven't completed that journey. It's a big picture document, the 2016 work from WAX. In fact, we got WAX designed to review the documentation I provided you tonight, so their input's actually built into the work that you're being presented. WAX did that work back in 2016, late 2016, and it was under the time of the development plan process, Development Act, and it wasn't under PDI, so it was a different world, and it was pre-COVID, and the world was different. It's still important, I think, that we focus on the town centre itself, because it is the core of the community. And in fact, Wendy did this slide. I'm more than happy if Wendy wants to speak to this one.
Oh my gosh, I feel so short. So I popped this slide in because I just really want to try and grab your attention around why a town centre is so critical to the successful future of a town. I was quite inspired by a keynote speaker at this year's LGA Roads and Works Conference. His name is Stephen Burgess from Complete Streets. He's the most fascinating combination of a traffic engineer and an economist, but he's got worldwide fame for working on town or village centre designs and bringing town centres back to being economically vibrant. And his view is that your town centre is your critical area for distinguishing yourself within your region. And I think for Gawler, you know, we have got this rapid urban growth, and we've got a number of, you know, potential bypass routes that are going to come into play. You know, we've got this gorgeous, gorgeous main street, and we need to secure it as the place that, you know, really starts to bring people into Gawler. We want Gawler to be a destination, not just a gateway or a bypass. You know, the Urban Design Framework 2016 talks about the main street as, you know, an urban heart. It's where the people come and they meet and they connect. And from there, you know, the gorgeous vibe. And a lot of this is about vibes. And I know that sounds a bit the castle-ish, but, you know, the vibe of our town, the fact that people still smile at each other down the street, you often bump into someone that you know. We want to hold on to that and use that to build up Gawler as a place to be. You know, we've got all this wonderful history, but we've also got the ability to become quite contemporary as well. And key to that is for your main street to be successful, you need to have the foot traffic, you need to have your gathering spaces, it needs to attract intergenerational people. Ideally, you've got people that live, shop, eat. It creates its own economy because people want to be there. We want it to be a street, and I know Andrew will talk about the difference between a road and a street, but a street is where people come to be, not just drive through. And I do genuinely believe that by getting the town centre design right, and it isn't just about infrastructure, there's a whole heap of planning stuff, which Andrew will much more diligently than me talk you through. You know, it is a key thing about, you know, building on a positive future for our town, and getting that business community happening. Now, I've got no idea how to turn the slide, sorry, Andrew. I'll keep going on with what has been achieved to date. Now, Andrew's being very kind and saying it's all my team, but, you know, anything pre-2019, it was the people before me who did, so all lots of credit to them. And, you know, if we can put a call out to Marty, because he ran a lot of these stages. So we've done loads of work. We've spent nearly $10 million doing all the different stages of upgrade along the main street. And for all the little bits of criticism sometimes we still get around parking, and, you know, you can't get around because someone's trying to reverse parallel park. The reality is we have created a better urban environment there where we've got the wider footpaths. We have been trying to encourage some of that more, I guess, sidewalk business and I guess, community activation. We've been fantastically supported in all of these stages, though, through grant funding. Nearly 40% of it has been grant funded. So thank you retrospectively to all those grant funders. Then we've done the Walker Place upgrade, and that really did get its funding through the Places for People based on this concept of this urban heart again. And, you know, you think if you could build on from what we did there and continue to extend it through the town centre, we would, you know, be on that real journey to getting, you know, our main street.
Further to that, this slide just shows some of the other investments that, of course, the building we're in now is part of that process. It's a mixed-use development. It's a significant investment and a vision of the future. Again, there can be criticisms about details of that, but I think fundamentally it was one of the key buildings in the town, and it's been developed to a significant degree, and it's a community asset. The other things which we talked about a little bit, and I acknowledge Dave Barrett providing me with information, was some of the work on murals and civic art. I know it's controversial given a conversation the other day about whether we should or shouldn't do another mural this year. But I think in the broad scheme of things, council spent over $300,000 over a period of time on murals, and they're there for all to see. There's a whole lot of civic art which gives a sense of place in the town, and I think that's a contribution to placemaking which should be acknowledged. On top of that, Wendy's team recently did upgrades in Julian Terrace in terms of DDA parking. She's behind me. She's too short. I can still see you. And I think that should be acknowledged, as well as tidying up elements of Todd Street, albeit we need to go back to Todd Street and do more, I think, once Aldi does their redevelopment on the other side of the road. So that's just a bit of a catalogue of some of the works that have been done. I guess going quicker now into why it's important. There are growth pressures, we've talked about that. There's a question of regional role. I know some in the room would talk about the best of town and country. I would say it's about the best of the old and the new. And I think we need to be clear about where our place is in the world and to look at what those emerging threats are and how we can deal with that. We talk in the report a little bit about our relationship to places like Two Wells. Concordia's coming forward, as we know. Their threats, their opportunities, they're a bit of both. As development occurs in places like Two Wells, you know, the daily shopping trip to Gawler, that'll probably end, other than if they're going to go to the hospital or Service SA or other things. But that relationship will change, is what I'm trying to get at. And I guess we just need to evolve in that space to be clear as to how we can continue to be relevant and to perhaps be compelling for other people to come here and spend time, not just to go shopping, transact. achieving potential and treating as a place, some of the feedback during the interviews I did, and I did about 8 to 10 of them as part of the background work, talked about this idea of a place that, yes, you'd do your supermarket shopping and so forth, but it wasn't necessarily for a lot of people a place where you would be a place just to occupy. And I think it's about that social space as well as the transactional commercial space. Yes, it meets a lot of needs. There's 3, 4 supermarkets, there's department stores, there's a lot of things in this town that I've lived in towns that have half of what you've got. But equally, it's about the public places, the public realm. It's what we're all trying to achieve in Murray Street, but also in the broader town grid. And I think it's almost like a bit of a puzzle about how to bring that together in a coherent way. We said we'd report back. Back in the day, earlier this year, there was a resolution to come back on the 2016 work. It's probably timely that we talk about the investment we've made because it is significant. So that's partly why we're here. And also because legislation's changed, one of the things that the UDF talked about was implementing code changes or amendments to the then Act. That never really occurred. So we've got a mixed-use suggested approach in the UDF and no provisions in the planning scheme that actually say that, so, or code. So I think there's a need to reconcile what we've said versus what we actually provide on the ground in terms of planning frameworks. And that's not the hardest thing to do. Unfortunately for us, those aren't costly things to do either. The timing is ideal. You know, we talk about Alinia's work on things like the parking deck, and we'll talk about that at another point in time tonight. But we're also looking at the planning of Concordia, and there's a whole lot of other projects, southern rural areas and so forth. The Integrated Transport Plan 2046, we're trying to work out what our financial commitments are and what our asset contributions need to be. And it's probably as good a time as any, frankly, to try and bring these strategies together so that we're quite clear as to what our brand is. So it's basically point 6. Securing a return on investment, we'll get to that in a minute, but one of the things you'd always want with the council investment is to see that that is met by the private sector doing likewise. And we'll get to that. There are some challenges in that space. And being clear on council's role. So we could talk about this in terms of budget, but you can also talk about that in terms of strategic planning. There's the opportunity to be a facilitator, and that could be, as I said, clear planning policy, it could be advocacy, it could be investment prospectuses. In instigator projects, the town hall's one of them. Walker Place was another. Our ability to do that over time, given the amount of money you've got to spend to be an instigator, that may be somewhat limited. We might need to be more in the other space as a facilitator and supporter. And supporter might be in a partner role where we do joint equity projects with other parties. There's a range of different ways we need to look at the levers of how we bring change. This was a slide which is probably better seen in your report, but it talks about the investment that's been made, and I just use $100,000 as a trigger point just to flag what's been actually approved, not necessarily developed on the ground. So the biggest development, of course, is the Audi development. I think it's about $4 to $5 million from recollection. And that was actually through SCAP, that wasn't actually through council or CAP. And again, you can have your views as to the design response of that development, but I think ultimately my point is more that council probably has invested more in Main Street than probably the private sector has. We did a bit of a walk around actually looking at vacancy rates, and I have to thank Chris Hannaford and others who assisted, and Chris designed the actual audit that we did, and then we went down for a bit of a walk, and ultimately we came up with a figure of vacancy of about 13.6%. There may be various reasons, and each individual landowner has their particular situation, but that vacancy rate is significant compared to a number of other town centres, albeit the ones we've used are the ones perhaps more the inner and middle ring because that's where the data exists. But it's more just to illustrate the point that the vacant shops, which I'd probably call zombie shops, the ones that, you know, they are the living dead to a degree. They do have a challenge in terms of the rest of the street, in terms of activation, the foot traffic we have, and about achieving the place we want to deliver. And that probably needs to be looked at. We've talked about a few of these strategies, and I won't go into it. You're familiar with some of the work that's going on at the moment, but I'm just trying to connect the dots. I also should mention, and it's adopted council strategy through the economic development strategy, that Main Street activation was the very first pillar that's in there. So I'm not saying probably anything you haven't heard before. but it does talk about governance, for example, and the relationship between us and the development group, and perhaps businesses more generally. And I think there's a need for that conversation about who is the champion. Is it a case of we're the champion, or are they the champion? Are we both the champion? I think we've been a champion in the sense of investment we've made, but I guess it's a little bit different to the question of governance. And I think we just need to look at that in a robust way as we move forward. Yeah. Sorry.
Take some questions. Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really good point. I mean, it's been suggested about a Main Street committee, but when you look at successful main streets like Nord Parade, it's their business development group. That is their Main Street committee. And I just wondered any other thoughts on how to beef that up. And I mean, for years, a number of us councillors and the Mayor went to a lot of Main Street committee meetings, and we actually had a Main Street meeting in Gawler, but we never really got much buy-in. And just, I think that's been really difficult for me, because I've seen how successful it's been for Nord Parade and just can't see it happening in Gawler. Any suggestions, please?
It's a good question. I was at a Main Street meeting, it was in Prospect probably a month or two ago, and I happened to be sitting next to the CEO of the Mildura Business Development Group, or the equivalent thereof, and I was really inspired by the way she seemed to understand the demographic of her community. I don't think she was too tongue-in-cheek when she said, look, there's a certain demographic in this town, they all like their racing boats and their fast cars. So a lot of their events were based on that, and that's what people responded to. And so they had a really vibrant event calendar, they had the buying local, and it seemed to be really well developed in terms of seeing measurable benefit in terms of investment by people in that main street. And I'm not making any comment as to how effective or otherwise the existing development group is, but it just requires dynamic people, I think, as much as the governance model itself. I think that's part of it. I think a lot of the councils, I dealt with Salisbury in terms of developing this up, and yes, you're right, it's their economic development team that are developing the investment prospectus. Yes, they're a much bigger council than us. I know they've got more capacity, they've even got more land they can put to market than we have. It's a bit different, but I think the idea of good people with a vision and a strong relationship with the business community, that needs to be wrapped up. And I think the economic development strategy was, 2-3 years ago now. That governance framework hasn't been fully finalised, I don't think. And I think there's an opportunity for us to try and get that right, because I don't think it's going to cost a lot to do so. It might be some resourcing internally. The conversation in the last budget was, do we or don't we have an economic development officer? But if you do, you don't go in half committed to doing it. You do it because there's a very strong symbiotic relationship with the economic development officer you've got and the business association. So we might, instead, I'm not saying we're making them report on their reporting, but there could be a perception that sometimes that happens a little bit. It's about us having an agenda, them having an agenda, and us leveraging off each other. And I think that's how the best model works. But that's something I'm happy to take direction from council, because I've only been here 15 months and others are aware of other models, so we can work through that. I think Karen, I might have a question as well.
I had a conversation with Grazio, actually, when the code was coming in and when the overlays were being put on our main street, and the town clock is an iconic piece of infrastructure. If we have 4 stories next to that, we won't see the town clock. So there's lots of opportunity in the main street with more recent buildings that have been built that can be redeveloped, but also celebrating the history, like the Pyle building, like these 2 buildings, like the post office and the town clock. The town clock is quite iconic. If you obscure that then obscures the town clock, and the town clock is an iconic piece of infrastructure. The hotels are are really beautiful pieces of infrastructure, and the private owners of the hotel have upgraded their hotels. And I think that we need council and council staff need to talk to building owners and see what can be done. You know, we had a presentation from somebody recently, I can't remember his name, that talked about bringing in more cafe and restaurant culture and a higher end restaurant culture. What are we doing about that? How are we making it easy for people to bring in their business ideas? I got my hands on the prospectus from Prospect City Council, and I had that nearly 5 years ago, gave it to the CEO, nothing ever became of it. And, you know, we do need a prospectus. We need a prospectus to make it easy for people to invest in our main street. But also, we need to understand and negotiate so that it makes, you know, we actually provide advice to prospective business owners that might want to set up business in the main street. It's 13%. The old, I used to call it Solomon's. It used to be Solomon's, and then I think it was Aspire, and that they're empty. What are we doing about that? Are we going to that business owner and saying, where's your development application? How can we make that happen? You know, that's the type of thing that we should be doing, knocking on business owners' doors and saying, what can we do to help? What can we do to help? And it's not just about bringing in 4-storey opportunities. We need to understand the iconic buildings in the main street and allow them to shine. Allow them to shine, because that brings character to our main street. That's the heritage of our main street. And I think that people love our main street. They love walking down it. And I think we don't have enough interest from shoppers. Have you talked to residents? Have you talked to shoppers? Or have you just talked to business owners? So I think that, you know, the shoppers are the ones that spend the money. They're the ones that spend the money. And what is it that they want in the main street? You know, and there has been research done that, you know, talks about chemists, talks about apartment buildings, it talks about restaurants, cafes, and you know, beauty and retail, and that work has already been done. That work has already been done. So we could incorporate that into a prospectus and make it easy for people to invest in the main street. You know, I think we can do more, and yeah, I think we. And I know that your planning department, Andrew, is very busy. I know that David's very busy. However, how do we make that happen if we've got these plans that never see the light of day? And we have spent $9.1 million, which is fantastic. Where's the private investment? Where's the private investment? So we need to understand and encourage business owners and lessees to invest, and that we should have a prospectus. Thank you.
Councillor Koch.
Thanks. Through the chair, Andrew, you talked about joint equity development, which I assume you're talking about private-public partnerships. What's the risks involved with that? Because my experience is that councils always get the rough end of the stick.
Through the chair, it's very timely that Linnea walked into the room. I think that conversation will be on a case-by-case basis and looking at what we're trying to deliver and how that would best work for councils. So I can't give you a generalised conversation as to whether councils get burnt 90% of the time or 50% of the time or never. But certainly the work that I've been seeing out of Salisbury and Two Wells and other places is that those communities are going with their eyes open and they're working out ways to legitimately and I think reasonably, on behalf of the community, look at how the community value is achieved at the same time as not leaving themselves exposed financially. And I think that's what we have to get to as a set of principles. What that looks like on the ground is what we have to work through. And in the same way that, you didn't ask the question, but it was a question that was asked by the Mayor. Have we talked to the community? No, because what I was asked to do was report back on what we've achieved in the last 6 to 8 years. I haven't got to that point yet. We do need to do that, clearly. I think this all has to, we had this conversation about equity in terms of other projects recently been before council, which we won't go into detail about tonight, and you're aware of which one I'm talking about. That's where that conversation is. As organisations change, or as they change their agenda, or they decide that something's really important relative to other projects, how do you do it in such a way that you don't go blindly jumping off the cliff? And that's what we need to work through, and that's where you hire people with expertise to tell you how to do it, because I'm probably not that person. I can just identify the questions.
Yeah. Sure.
In the document, it talks about heritage being the difference between the new developments and that people would come to Gawler for the heritage. How are we going to make sure that we retain that, not lose the fabric, the heritage by whacking up great big buildings, etc., big monoliths? Because if you lose that character, you may as well just go to, Two Wells or Concordia or whatever. So we need to be conscious of that's what people come to Gawler for. Yep.
That goes back to the question that the Mayor was asking before, which was Karen's view, as we were talking about, is it 4-storey? I don't think I even put a number on there. I just think saying it's low density, it misses the point. I think you need to identify what the use is going to be first, and then you work out how to respect the existing heritage values, and there are at least 5 or 10 really key buildings in this town which are, if you like, the navigation beacons of the town. I think the clock is one of them, and that's probably effectively like 5 stories tall. And there are other buildings, the mill next to the bridge and so forth. And if we were to lose those as being those vantage points, I think you'll lose what Gawler is. No one's debating that. I think it's more about there are sites which don't have heritage values per se on them. They are probably, I think the fixation or the concern has always been, we've looked at Murray Street, but Murray Street's like 1 kilometre long, and there are bits of it which are less sensitive than other bits. And I'm not indicating tonight which ones they are, but to go for a walk, you can see them. And it's the same thing at the northern end as well, where the Coal Central is. And I think also in Julian Terrace, where basically every building fronts onto Murray Street, but that means the back end fronts onto Julian. So you have a terrible experience. And I think there's opportunities to get better in terms of how we manage those back-end experiences, because I think Julian Terrace is an absolute gem potentially, but it just hasn't been seen through. So I guess they're the things I'm thinking about.
Considering the investment the council has made in this centre, have you got any insight in why there hasn't been any private investment other than, say, the pubs?
There's a range of reasons. One of the hotel owners I talked to said it's very hard to activate your hotel when you've got the pigs coming past every day and the truck going to their final destination. And that's a pretty colourful metaphor, but I think when you've got 23,000 vehicles going down Murray Street, which is more than Prospect by about 6,000 vehicles a day, and probably, well, we're talking numbers that are probably beyond how you'd achieve activation in a street. It's that issue of streets versus roads, and I think in some ways I'd say Murray Street's kind of a road. It's part street, part road, and it's neither. You've got people doing U-turns in the middle of it. You've got people trying to park legitimately because they want to do local activity, and yet you've got people trying to get down Lindock Road and go through the Barossa and past the pig trucks. So it's a mixture of all these things, and it doesn't necessarily achieve the experience that we want. So I think part of it's the traffic, and so that probably links back to how we look at freight movements in the wider district. So it's what we're doing in Roseworthy, it's what we're doing in Concordia, and the network, which is where the integrated transport plan comes in. I think it's partly, as the Mayor said, probably the investment prospectus. I think, we're not the first people to think of an investment prospectus. They've been around for years, but I don't know if we've had one. I doubt we have. On the issue of policy too, I think it's not the case that we're saying that the whole town's up for grabs. That's clearly not what we want. I think, however, there are iconic buildings in terms of heritage, and there are buildings that aren't iconic buildings. And I think in talking to the community, we can work through how we find some balance. So it is the best of old and new. At the moment, it's just the best of old. And I think that's probably where we need to find that conversation to go to. All right.
Councillor Hennessy.
Sorry.
Just a comment. I mean, thank you for the report, and I'm glad we're drilling down on it. And it does require nuances, because I've watched over the last 40 years us try to tackle the whole Main Street. And we have some deliberate, we can't be unique, but we have some particular problems here. And whenever council tries to establish itself as the leader, we're fighting, it feels like we're fighting against, the tenants, plus the landlords, plus whatever. And one of the points that disturbed me, I think it was in this report or maybe a later report, is that empty shops attract tax concessions. So, it's a very deliberate, and it's very obvious to the community that there's the equivalent of land banking, really, until the opportunity is correct. In the meantime, we have a 13-point-whatever%. It's not, I don't actually think some of that is anything council can do. We have to, I think we need to scratch and really look at what possible solutions there are. We need to be really clever about this, because even in my time, I think we've had about 5 economic development officers. They've not achieved much, bluntly. It's a bit like banging your head against a wall. So I think we need to get cleverer at it.
Did you still have slides? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I know this is a great conversation. We've got several other agenda reports to go through. I'll just go through the slides at speed, because I think we've covered most of the key elements. We've talked about being a partner of change, human scale. So I think they're the things we need to look at. But nothing I've said here is something you haven't heard before. I just provided some examples which are in the report where I think we can get a little bit hooked on the issue of stories, which I think is just the wrong conversation. The one on the bottom right was in South Melbourne, one of my old stomping grounds, and that's a 3-storey development, new development next to a 2-storey. I can't see any difference in size between those two, and they work perfectly fine. And so that's a mixed-use development. So I think talking about whether it's 2, 3, 4 different stories is probably the wrong conversation. It's about how it fits into the context. And the one on the left-hand side, I used to have an office in North Melbourne, and it's a highly activated place, and I think these things don't happen by accident. Finally, to provide more local experiences, yes, I do drive around Goodwood, and yes, I do like the paving in the road. I do think it gives a sense of it's a shared space, and I think it's more of a classic street as opposed to a road. The Parade Norwood is yes, as pointed out earlier, I guess it's a good example of governance and how that seems to work. Yes, there's some excellent bookstores that I go to there. But the trees are important in terms of scale. You've got old buildings and you've got mixed-use new buildings, and it seems to overall work to me. And that doesn't mean that you have to embrace exactly what they've done, but there are some lessons, I think. And I think Prospect provides lots of different lessons of the old and the new. And there's a work plan here, but I won't go into detail. But I just thought I'd give this to you so you had something. You didn't have to wade through 30 pages of my report. Thank you.
Thanks. So we'll add a few more questions. So, we'll see. In terms of vacancy rate and that sort of thing, I know if you look at like the City of Adelaide, for example, it's not just is the building used, but you can go into a building and on the ground floor there'll be a cafe and then there's a different thing set up in the upstairs. That's the kind of thing we have an opportunity to do in Gawler. Like the buildings are all using like 30% of their capacity, but the reason that it's not being done is because it's a big financial hassle. Do you have any commentary around that?
I guess you're doing battle with the building code and regulations, and if it was easy, people would be doing it already. These buildings aren't necessarily designed for fire rating. They don't have emergency ingress and egress. And yes, of course, you can address them if you toss enough money at it. But if you've got in some cases, a conservative ownership base and people who've owned it for a period of time and are relatively content with it being what it is, then I think the aspiration that was in the economic development strategy of, well, we don't need to do mixed use because it's already there. There's vacant second stories. Yes, they're there, but they won't be used for residential purposes if it's too hard to do it. There are some ways we can address that to a degree in terms of guidelines. I know the City of Adelaide does do something in that space, and our building inspectors are aware of it, and we work through that with landowners, but it's not without significant challenge.
Yeah, I just figure that's, I guess, part of our difference between us and, you know, Concordia or whatever else comes online is that we do have a whole network of upstairs and downstairs and back rooms and things that are currently underutilised. So, I just think it would be great to see, I guess, I don't know, going around asking the shops, you know, what would be your dream building upgrade if you just ignored the planning code or... Yeah, and then sort of, said, well, what is it we can and can't do? Because I think there are a bunch of small upgrades that people just don't feel equipped to. You know, they'd like to be able to paint, you know, their front a little better, but they're worried that they don't know what the approved heritage colours are and all that kind of thing. Councillor Kosh?
I've just remembered. One of the comments, Andrew, was about having more residential accommodation close to the town. I think I read that there. How would that happen? I mean, because I thought, okay, we'll just get people to live on top of the buildings. Then I read the next paragraphs explaining all the issues, and I thought, oh, well, that's not going to work. So, how would that actually work?
It's really hard to achieve genuine mixed use in, say, a heritage precinct main street of Murray. In the central core, for example, I think that would be challenging, other than adaptive reuse of existing second stories, if you can do it. I think it's more when you talk about the edges of Main Street that's a kilometre long, there are key, largely underutilised sites. We've got some sites that basically just have cars on them, don't even have buildings on them. So there are clearly underutilised sites in the main street. I think they're the sites which have much more potential, and you basically have to build it from scratch, I would think, in most cases. The other thing you talked about, and I think the Mayor did as well, is, yeah, under the PDI Act, it's a different landscape in terms of local character controls and how we might be able to do something which doesn't sell away the good characteristics of the town we've got. And, you can argue about whether it should be land management agreements, but there's differences of opinion about how that should work really and whether that's the right strategy. Sometimes the Commission and Plus say, well, yes, in theory, you can come up with local policy provisions and we're not, resistant to that, but, time will tell. I think that's what we need to work through, because the last thing you want to do is simply just say, no longer is it low density 1 and 2 story and it's whatever the market wants. That's not what we're talking about. There has to be some localised controls that would say for key sites, this is what we'll accept, but these are the consequences in terms of what you have to provide back to the community. This is how it works. And be a little bit directive. So yes, we'll be flexible in terms of scale, but there are design requirements here which are non-negotiable. And I don't think we've got to that point yet, and I haven't got the answers for you today, but I think that's what the next step of the WACS work was.
Okay, well, one of the reasons why I say it is because have you heard of the Harvey that was going to be built near the railway station? And so that went all through the approval and everything else, and everyone was happy, but it stopped. So there must have been a reason why that stopped. Was that the reason that they wanted to sell them off the plan, did they?
It was a sale of the plan project, as far as I know. It wasn't mixed use. Yes, it was an ideal location if you want to get to the train. But, I didn't actually look in detail at the design of it, and, there could be a range of reasons why it wasn't seen by the market to be worth going any further with, and I can't really comment on that one.
It went right through the process.
It did. I've seen the poster's still there, I think, from memory. David Biltovich might be able to answer that.
Yes, so speaking to the developers, the densities were a bit ahead of their time for Gawler. So the five-storey buildings are a little bit too soon for Gawler. However, there is a proposal in the system now for that site to still be quite dense, but not to the same height as what the previous proposal was.
Councillor Samble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Andrew, I know you haven't been here that long and everybody's put all the jobs onto you, but the Business Development Board is actually financed by every shop that's in the main street. And traders and that pay the money into them. Where does the business, first question, where does the Business Development Board fit into this plan? Because so many things that are in the report here tonight and what you've said and that sort of stuff are around the point of traders working better together with their landlords. And I've been around a long time, and the landlords in the main street are investors. A lot are very wealthy farmers in the area, and good luck to them. They're very hard workers and so forth. But at the end of the day, I have tried so many times the centre of the street, which we call Victory Square, which is right next door to us. Honestly, I travel a lot in the outback. It just looks like an outback parking spot. And I've tried everything in the world to get the owners, who we know, and I know him personally and that sort of thing. He said, no, when council starts to do something progressively, well, then we'll do something, or if they want to, the council can do it. So the first question is, the Business Development Board, where does it fit with this plan?
So, well, first I'll just say the Business Development Group it's not a Main Street committee, which is, because that's a point of contention, is they represent every business in the council area. And if you focus on the Main Street, the other businesses start to arc up about, they pay the same amount of the rates towards it, etc. Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
I agree, but...
Oh, sorry. I just...
I'll go to the next question.
Next question is about parking. Oh, shit, does it work or what?
Yeah.
And then it's about parking. And it goes on and on and on about Goose Island or Nowick Park, which was donated by Mr. Nowick, which is exactly when you are standing around the Julian Terrace, you look onto this park. And the only thing that use it is the dogs for their little wee-wees and stuff like that, and their grasses are cut and everything. Are we going to look at that as a parking area, especially with the Audi coming on board? I'd like to know just exactly where cars are going to park and how we can ever move with this plan while it's a truck route that takes over the top end of Murray Street, Lyndoch Road. I think we're dreaming.
All right, so there's three questions there. I'll start with the third question first. So the third question was about freight movements. And I think what I said, I'll stick by, which is the timing of the integrated transport plan, the work on Concordia, is the only way you're going to address freight movements in Gawler. Otherwise, it'll be exactly like it's been for the last however many years it's been. I agree, you can't activate Main Street with freight movements. This morning I walked into the car park and there was a cattle truck that went past me, and I'm pretty sure it was a pig truck just before that. That doesn't look great for the town, and it's not what the town needs. So I think that's something we need to work through. And it's not just that, it's also the volume of traffic. It's type of traffic and the volume, and they both need to change. And I think they will do. I think if we think in a network sense, Wendy and her team, I'm happy if Wendy wants to say anything about integrated transport, but the network and the hierarchy and a movement in place, this should be a very easy town to walk around. The footpath network, we talk about a backlog of 30 years, and I'm not sure whether that's right or wrong. It feels right when you walk around that there is a backlog, a big one. That's really important. If you want to talk about heritage and enjoying it, and the street having competitive advantage, it's because it's not a box centre. And you have to enjoy that by being out of your car walking around, which is what I was talking about. And that means decent footpaths. And yes, they're generally okay in Murray Street, other than the northern end, where they're pretty ordinary near the railway crossing, because I guess we haven't delivered that yet. That's not Wendy's fault. She's done more the southern end and the middle. but I think that needs to get looked at. So I've dealt with freight. The second question, I think, well, first question, I'll go back to that. That was about governance and the role of the development group. It's not for me to say, other than to say that I think we probably need a creative tension backwards and forwards between us and them, where we have some thoughts, they have thoughts, and we get the best out of both. And I think at the moment, if they struggle to get, I'm not sure about their membership in terms of how activated the majority of them are, but that's really where you need to get investment from that group, because they're only as good as the people they represent. And the effort they put in, it might be to do with the skill sets of the development group, it might be to do with whether we can help mentor that group further. There's a range of different things we can do in terms of governance. I'm not saying in any means abolish it. In fact, everyone I've talked to said they should stay. But I think we need to be able to have some relationship with them which is beyond them just reporting back to us on what they've done. That relationship needs to change. What was the second question again? Parking, Goose Island. I have a vision, I sound like Martin Luther King, and my vision isn't about parking necessarily, but I do think that there are absolutely appalling linkages between the town centre and their really bad footways, for example, made of concrete and not very attractive. I think we do need to open it up in a pedestrian sense, and I almost have a vision, given it's flood liable land, that maybe in a different universe it might be more of a landscape garden type arrangement or something. It's had industry in the past, it's flooded. The car park strategy doesn't say it'll be a parking area, but equally I also acknowledge that, you know, if we're talking about 15 to 20,000 square metres more retail in the next 20 years, i.e. 4 times Gawler East, and you need 2,000 more parking spaces, it may change sometime, but it won't be in the next 5 or 10 years, I wouldn't think, and I don't really know, but I do think it would be a quality landscape space, and we don't really have that here. Yes, we have the river, but I think you could augment that with something at Goose Island. But that comes down to money too, and council probably has its, a range of commitments it needs to really deal with, which probably go ahead of that. But I'm in council's hand on that one. I think that's the 3 questions you had.
Yeah, Mayor?
I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation.
All right, you can both go and sit down again.
Are you finished?
Thanks for your extended question and answer session. No, it's good. This is what the committees are for.
That's right.
So you're moving the recommendation?
Yes, if I can speak to it. I think this is a worthy report. Thank you, Andrew and the team, for writing this report. It's an update of what is an exceptional 2016 urban design framework. There's lots of great ideas in that urban design framework, and we haven't capitalised on them because we've spent $9.1 million. However, that's not a small amount of money over many, many years, but there's still more work to be done, and I really like what your strategic thinking is, Andrew, and it takes us down the road a little bit further, but it also gives us a vision, and I like the idea of a prospectus. I think we desperately need that, and we desperately need council and business owners and the Gawler Business Development Group, and I'd like to congratulate Kevin Fisher on becoming president of the Gawler Business Development Group. Well done, Kevin. I think there's a real opportunity now to have meaningful dialogue with the Gawler Business Development Group, and there's also more opportunity to develop things like prospectuses, things like collaboration with the business community, and I think there's a real opportunity going forward. And I think this is an excellent report. It's a good update of what we have. The Town Centre Design Framework 2016, which had some excellent ideas in there. There are some opportunities to redevelop the main street without denigrating the cultural heritage of the main street. And there's different sections of the main street which you've identified, which I think is really, really good. and understanding the role of the southern area, the central area and the northern area. And we do need to get trucks off Lindop Road. I mean, I don't know when that northeastern bypass is going to be built, but when it is built, that's when we have an opportunity, because the traffic just won't come. They'll go down Sturt Highway. They won't come through Gawler, and they'll go up Sturt Highway and go through into Concordia. So I think there's a real opportunity to plan for that, because Concordia really is intertwined with Gawler, and that traffic will clog us if we're not careful. However, we need to advocate for that road, and I just think that's going to be a game changer. That's all I've got to say.
Seconder, Councillor Koch.
Yeah, I'm happy to second it. I'm buoyed a bit by the comments from Andrew regarding heritage residents, residents within near the centre, etc. I just want to comment on the road. Yes, we do need the bypass, and I do know from experience. I grew up in Albury. I used to travel a lot to Melbourne down the Hume Highway, and all the trucks used to rumble through all those little towns, Seymour, all those towns. When they put the bypasses through, those towns actually thrived, because they got the big bloody trucks out of there, and those communities actually thrived. So I think, if we can get that road in, I think Gawler will thrive. So yeah, let's. I don't know who's going to pay for it. It's going to cost a lot of money, but we'll see what happens. Thank you.
And do we have other discussion? All right, Councillor White and then Councillor Hughes.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I'm happy to support the motion as it stands. I think it's a pretty bold proposal. So I'd like to commend Andrew and your team on putting it forward, and I think at times in the report being quite blunt, but I think that's important to talk about the realities and the challenges we face. I do see it as the next steps to what is one of our, in my opinion, one of our really great plans, the 2016 Town Centre Design Framework. I see this as the next steps. This is almost the implementation plan of it, which is something, I guess, that has lacked previously. So seeing it being put into place through this motion, I think, is fantastic. There's no denying that we need to do some serious work on the main street. 13% vacancy rate is, really extremely poor. When looking at 11% in other metropolitan streets as really poor, and ours is 13%, we have some serious work. And I agree with the zombie principle that when you do walk past empty shops, it brings down the entire vibe, to use Wendy's words, of the whole main street. Yes, there's lots of bold things in that proposal. Do we all agree with every single one of them? Probably not. But I think what this does now is it gives the chance for that additional research, that consultation, that discussion to, I guess, start again and go, what could this look like? And most importantly, as Andrew's written in his report, I agree with him in saying this is probably one of our most important projects for council over the next decade and beyond. In fact, if not one of the most important item, because it really nuts down to the essence of our town, and it will determine the sustainability and viability of Gawler as a regional centre, as a town, and frankly as a council, moving forward into the future. So I wholeheartedly agree with that. That includes looking at things like Two Wells with their supermarkets coming online. That's a huge base that we lose coming to our town. I'm all for looking at residential opportunities close to the main street. I mean, we are in a housing crisis, and there has been proven around the country, but also I think Prospect Road keeps coming up as a great example of having high density residential living close to a historic main street is just great. So I'm really, really excited by this, and I think council can be leaders in this. We talked about champions. I think there will be lots of champions, but I do agree that council needs to be the driver, and we need to set the precedent, and we need to be leaders to our business community as well and say, hey, we understand there's challenges, we can see them, this is how we're going to move forward, and it's actually really, really exciting. So thank you very much for your hard work, Andrew and staff, and very happy to support this.
Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, just briefly, I think, I agree with everything everyone said, but recently the federal government's announced that there is a lot more black spot sort of funding as well, and we have recently had 2 deaths on either end of our main street. So that's tragic, and they were pedestrians, just crossing the road. Yeah. So, I think we do owe it to our community to look at that and really push hard for that major bypass, especially those big trucks. And I've seen them do a lot of damage to our curbing, and they are quite aggressive to other drivers. And yeah, it's just amazing, some of the behaviours. I suppose it goes both ways with cars doing the same to the trucks, but have seen it. And in some regards, I think we've been lucky that we haven't had more incidents as well. So I think that's a major side of it. But yeah, agree with all the rest of the debate. It's been really good. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think there was a mention of the different roles that a council can play, facilitator and instigator and partner. And I think we've done a lot as an instigator because, the Civic Centre is a huge project, for example. But on the facilitator front, we haven't really had any major successes on the main street or anything like that. So I think we need to look at ways to improve that. Is there any other discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. So just a question. Would we want to go into address the confidential item first, noting that there are people here, or would we like to just continue on in the order? It's up to the chamber. Councillor White.
I was actually going to move that we move item 6.4, the Helia Residential Park, first, and then potentially we could go into the confidential item, but I think we've got guests here and I'm sure they're interested in what we have to discuss, but I'm sure they're here for item 6.4, so I'd like to move that we move 6.4 up the agenda.
Seconded by Councillor Samble. Any discussion? All those in favour? Carried unanimously. So we'll jump to 6.4. Which is the Helia residential. So if Chris, if you're interested in just, responding to some of the comments from earlier, you can go there or there, whichever one you like.
Thank you, Chris Hannaford, Senior Strategic Planner. Through the Chair, Councillors, Mayor and Gallery, just want to talk about the Helia Residential Park Code Amendment. I suppose the crux of the discussion to date has been about who pays for basic infrastructure, and is it possible to get a cost-effective stormwater recycling system that drains to Carbeathan Reserve and not to Gawler River. And also, very importantly, making sure that we've got very thorough investigations on particularly the stormwater options. The Minister approved an initiation letter in October 2022 for the Code Amendment, and he noted the possibility that there would be further investigations required. We've provided a number of reports to Council. One on the 14th of February identified the need for a land management agreement, and that has always been an essential part of getting the basic infrastructure in place for this project, and also identified the need for a stormwater management system. On the basic infrastructure, we've seen that a footpath along Helia Road frontage with some drainage is essential, that it's essential that there's a pedestrian crossing linking Hillier Residential Village to Carbethan Reserve, that there's a vehicle access point, there's a walking trail along the Gawler River, and also that the most basic piece of infrastructure, the stormwater system, is in place, and that we thoroughly investigate, can we get water, excess stormwater from the residential park to Carbethan Reserve? We think it's possible. But I would say that those are not voluntary pieces of infrastructure, they're essential pieces of infrastructure to link Hillier Residential Park to the rest of Gawler. It's a matter of having that not as an outpost of the city, but an essential part of the city, and we're essentially extending our urban boundary to meet that. At the moment, we have a concept plan where there is a detention basin in the floodplain, and there is a view that excess water could go to the Gawler River. We don't think that is a very good outcome, and it's not supported by State Planning Policy 14. We think that it's best to actually look at getting that water to Carbethan Reserve, and Fife, who were the consultant engineers with URPS and for Martin, actually developed two options, but the option to the Gawler River looked like the least expensive and the obvious one to take, but that one failed to account for the disposal of 84,000 cubic metres of soil, sort of quite a grand omission there. So we actually got Southfront to review Fife's work, and they recommended an independent cost estimator is engaged jointly by council and themselves, or jointly appointed, and also they recommended a stormwater management strategy is put in place that is very thorough. Those are all good recommendations, and Southfront has worked with us on a number of projects and been very good. I also think it's very keen that we actually get the LMA, which is in the report, endorsed. And before we provide a letter of support, we've been ready to provide a letter of support since February, but have not been able to get agreement on this crucial infrastructure. I think all of the infrastructure we are now in agreement on, except for the stormwater management system, that is now embedded in the LMA as to what is required for that stormwater management strategy. So we think it's an important facility. We want it to go ahead. We've been ready for 6 months for it to be approved. But let's get that agreement on infrastructure, and there's a movement within the state government that infrastructure plans must be done first. I agree with that. And that's what the draft LMA is about, getting that stormwater agreement in place. If we weren't bringing it to this particular meeting, the next meeting is the 13th of February, which is just way too long. The issues raised by Grazio on the detail with the LMA we can address. I think particularly the issue of timing. Two issues he highlighted was timing and cost. In timing, we need to make sure that Carbethan Reserve is ready to receive the stormwater when the Hillier Residential Park development is nearing completion. It's a very valid point, and we can work with them on that point, and particularly the resolution empowers the CEO with the ability to make minor amendments to the LMA and the approval letter, and those we would see as minor amendments. On the issue of costs and the removal of actually costed figures from the appendices and the table, that was the advice from our lawyers, Kelledy Jones, who said to take those actual figures out because of inflation, etc. And those developments are largely the responsibility of the proponent. So we think it's fair that we leave that table as is, unless we've got some other arguments coming forward. And we're very happy to listen to those comments on the LMA and make amendments as required. But essentially, we're actually been talking on this one for a while, and we're very keen to move it ahead. So any questions from the floor?
Councillor Koch?
Through the chair, Chris, I mean, when I read the report, that was the only bit that struck out to me. So I just want to make clear, by the storm water would actually drain back to Carbeathan Reserve. There's no other pumps or anything else, because it is down. I mean, obviously the water drains to rivers. This is up from the river. Is that right?
Sorry, if you can use a microphone.
Drainage, it says here in the report.
Under all situations, there is a requirement for cutting and filling, but the site generally runs west, runs towards the west. So some of the site, obviously closer to the river, runs towards the river, the bottom third, but the other parts of the site are up and down, not heavily, but that's why we want to actually make sure that the stormwater management strategy is actually well done and well costed.
So the water won't be going to a drainage point, but will just flow back up?
That is, we're interested in a passive wet system that would flow to Carbeathan Reserve, essentially under the road, and that some pumps would be on Carbeathan Reserve to put it into storage tanks that would be at our cost.
Yeah, that's what I read that. And the other thing is just the soil.
Sorry, can you use a microphone?
I think the soil, the 240,000 cubic metres, that's a fair bit. Does each load need to be tested because you're actually taking it off site, or is it just you just test it once, because that's an issue sometimes?
I couldn't answer that question, but it's 84,000 cubic metres, which was not accounted for.
Yep.
Point of clarification, given that I've already used up probably half your night with my report on the UDF. In regards to the LMA itself, if you go to page 52 of 117 of the attachments, it says quite clearly under clause 10 that parties will use all reasonable endeavours, and my reading of that in practical terms is in regards to a stormwater strategy that so long as there's good faith between ourselves and the proponent, if it comes to that there just is no physical way at halfway reasonable price to get the water into Carbeathan, of course the LMA allows for an alternative outcome, but our design principle is to achieve it if we can reasonably do so, and that's what the LMA says. The LMA also was drafted after conversations with URPS where we had perhaps got to a bit of an impasse, and rather than continuing to have the impasse and do more design on the run, it was felt that we should put some LMA principles together, and we'll deal with this after it gets to the Minister and after the code amendment gets through, so at least the zoning is in place. So I just thought I'd mention that.
Mayor?
I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation. Can I speak to it?
Yep.
Thank you, Chair. I was pleased to hear, Chris Hannaford, that you said the issues around stormwater could be addressed. Now that, and Andrew's also said that after it goes to the minister, you can continue negotiations. So I'm really pleased to hear that. I do like this recommendation. I think we need to move forward with the LMA. It also adopts in principle attachment 2 being a submission to URPS and the Minister for Planning on the code amendment, and delegate to the CEO authority to make minor amendments consistent with the finalised and signed LMA where required. So I put this forward and I hope people support it.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Hughes, do you wish to speak? Is there any discussion? Councillor White, a question?
I just, from a syntax point of view, I guess we've talked about the CEO and their delegate making minor amendments. Tonight we've heard about the proponents having concerns. We've heard Chris speak in regards to there's opportunity for discussion. I guess I'm happy to support the motion as it stands, but I really just want clarification that these things can be discussed between the proponent and council moving forward. I just am aware in the past that there's a bit of a grey area around minor amendments.
Through the chair, going back to page, as I said, 52 of 117, so, and also to what Chris said earlier, the language of the LMA is around the idea of a stormwater strategy. And what it says under clause 10 is that parties will use all reasonable endeavours to mutually agree upon a final stormwater strategy. So in doing that work, if literally, you're pumping water uphill and there's no physical way you can do it without spending 5 times as much as putting into the river, then we're not going to be saying that they can't entertain an alternative option to going to carbethan. That would be unreasonable. And that's, I think, the good faith that we're going to provide. But I think because there was differences of methodology in terms of how we calculated a stormwater plan, as did they, that we got a little bit, we weren't frustrated with each other, but we had creative differences that probably meant we needed to just create some principles now and deal with it after. So I think the LMA itself provides the flexibility rather than me or someone else in my chair signing off the LMA. The LMA itself provides the flexibility.
So yeah, I know you wanted to speak. Under the way that system works, once we're in the debate, we can't sort of jump out to the audience. But this is a recommendation to council, so this isn't the final decision. It will come to the council meeting next Tuesday if you want to continue presenting. Councillor Lorna.
I'm basically a little bit concerned in regards to it being open-ended, a grey area for the proponent themselves. I could see that they would be very concerned. We can say what we like around here. At the end of the day, it's going to come to the loggerheads with it. I definitely want to see it go ahead. It's a great development, that sort of thing, but some more assurances about what's going to happen around the stormwater and the cost things incorporated with it is, that's what I've got to say on it. So, thanks.
Were you what? Just statement? You can answer if you like, but Councillor Sample?
We're hearing about grey areas, and you just said that Grazio can't answer a question. I would like to see that Grazio be given permission to answer some of the questions that have just been asked from Councillor White and Councillor Lowner, please.
Is that something that's like a... No?
It would be through the next process at the council meeting.
Okay. It's apparently not a thing. Councillor White?
Without knowing it back to front, 2/3 majority of the council or committee can suspend meeting procedures if the chair allows.
Is there support from 2/3 of the committee? No. So, we'll continue moving on. Is there any other discussion? Councillor Koch.
Yeah, look, I'm happy to support it at the moment. The main reason why that in the LMA there's that good faith agreement there, and I don't think we're going to get into a position where we'd expect them to pump water uphill. I mean, we won't. That's why I asked the questions about where was gravity fed. And I assume they've taken levels. That's what I would have done. I assume they've taken all the levels and they've worked out that it's possible. So I'm happy now that that's been explained and that's in the LMA, and I think it can be resolved without being excessively expensive for everybody. And so I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
Is there any other discussion? Councillor Hughes?
Yeah, I mean, this, especially the stormwater issue, this has always been an issue throughout the entire process. It's not new. It's something council's been working through, and yeah, I'm quite happy to support this process because I think this has been a sensible process to work through. I think the staff and the developer have been trying to get the best for both worlds. You're never going to get a perfect, and I think the LMA and this process will get the best to protect the rest of the ratepayers of Gawler and give us a robust development as well. So I'm happy to support the motion.
If there's no other discussion, sorry, a question?
Just through you, Chair, just getting the next steps, I guess, from this point onwards with if that was possible, just have a brief overview.
Through the Chair, depending on what Council chooses to do at the Council meeting, if it ratifies the decision of IES, then basically the proponent would go back to the Minister with the submission, and then we'll be waiting for the Minister to make a decision ultimately.
Does that answer your question? Okay. Mayor, do you wish to close the debate? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? It's carried. And so this takes us back to 6.2 unless someone wants to... Councillor White?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'll move that we bring forward item 8.1.
Okay, and that is the confidential report. Do we have a seconder?
Explanation of why we want to bring it forward, please? I don't understand why we're doing that.
Because the people are in the room.
But they're not within the confidential group.
Well, we will presumably add them into the list when. Yeah. So they speak in confidence and then leave, and then we have our deliberations. Is how it would work. But do we have a seconder? Councillor Lorna, any discussion? If not, put the motion. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. So we'll just wait to turn the live stream, pause the live.
Of the person who supplied the information, and it would on balance be contrary to the public interest, Crown, or other public authority or official not being an employee of the council or a person engaged with council, and would on balance be contrary to the public interest. Specifically, that the disclosure of information may prejudice the commercial position of council.
And the Mayor's happy to second that. Any discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. And now we're going into confidence. David's noble sacrifice. He was going to give us a presentation, but we're going to just move that to any questions. We have, any questions or a mover? Councillor White.
I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation. I think, again, this is another topic that is can be contentious within the community, and I think the report is extremely well written, and the plan that the motion sets out, I wholeheartedly agree with. I think looking after our walls first as a priority is important, and I mean, what surprised me the most, I think, out of the whole report is, we have a vast number of private walls compared to council walls, which is fair enough, but not, I guess, not having an up-to-date audit of them all and a database. I think that's probably the part that meant to me, that's where we need to start. I mean, this again is a mammoth sort of challenge that we have in the community, and it's one that comes with being a historic town. But step zero is, I guess, doing that audit on our walls, on private walls, and seeing the condition of them all, and then working out how we want to proceed. So I think it's a little bit of a no-brainer, but a credit to the staff for putting into place this. I think it's best practice, and I really look forward to seeing what's coming with it. And I think that the approximate cost of $15,000 for the external auditor will be worth it, so we can get a better picture of the current state of play. So happy to support the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Hennessy, you wish to second?
Yes, but I also have a question. In point 5, that workshop, would we intend that to be a workshop to which members of the public could attend? Given that we have a large amount of expertise in our community, I think this could be a workshop where we would gain from the expertise within our community. So was that the intention, that it be public?
Through the chair, unlike the last item, the answer would be yes, the workshop would be public.
Yep, we can add the word public as long as Councillor White agrees. Yep. Okay, is there any other discussion? If not, Councillor White, do you wish to speak again? No? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. And now we move... Yeah.
Have a longer debate, so
yeah.
All good.
We move to 6 point... Yeah, thanks, Dave. Move to 6.3, Southern Rural Areas Engagement, and the Mayor is happy to move it. Do you wish to speak? No? Councillor Hughes is happy to second. Do you wish to speak? Any discussion? Councillor Koch?
Look, I just want to make sure that this consultation actually captures all the views down there, because, I've said it a number of times, I won't repeat. There's different people down there with different agendas, and we have to be careful that we just don't listen to one group of people, and they can get quite loud, and they can drown out other views. So I'm just really concerned that we don't get to the point where one group dominates what's happening down there. Because I've been at meetings where they've actually hailed down people that have said things that they don't like, and have been really abusive to councillors at meetings if they say something they don't like. So I just hope that isn't going to be repeated. Thank you.
You have to press the button first. Sorry. Chris can answer it.
Through the chair, we will do a very extensive engagement strategy. We'll do it amongst the 5 precincts that we've identified, and we've also got in the engagement plan all the urban groups, the environmental groups, and the local landowner groups. And we've got a good database to start that. And we've also got to build, which is 90% done actually at the moment, a website which will be everybody will be able to type in their land, Coles Road, Cuddler, for instance, and they'll be able to see what potential land use policy we're proposing. We're going to have fact sheets for each precinct as well. And so it's going to be a very comprehensive engagement process.
The reason I asked the question, because I read all that, but there is a group down there that is really well organised, and they're attuned to, because they want, they're attuned to it. They've been revved up for the last, 13 years plus. And there's a whole group of people down there who are really quite happy with the way it is, who aren't in a group, who aren't sort of being revved up by anybody, who just, I've spoken to heaps of people down there that just say, well, I just like it the way it is, really. But you may not capture these people, but you will, because you've got those groups, which is fine, but all those people out there that are happily going along, enjoying life, and have come into that area because that's what they want. And I don't know where you're going to pick up that view down there.
Look, there's nothing we can do about the fact that some people are going to be highly engaged and are going to respond to our survey. We just hope that we can capture the other people as well.
Yeah, I'm just concerned it'll just be repeat, and then the only message we get is from this one particular group that makes out that they're speaking for everybody down there, which they're not.
Yeah.
Through the chair, I think the answer to that one might be that if we effectively let it drop to each and every landowner and we try and not just pander to the loudest voices, we just do the best we can, I think, to try and capture the data to give a clearer picture of what's really going on. And related to that, I guess, as well, it's a bit of an iterative process. So I've got confirmation from the Commission about meeting with them in the next 2 weeks to start talking about the southern rural area in more detail, thanks to Chris organising that for me. So we're meeting with them and also with Renewal SA before Christmas. So I think all of this feeds into the conversation about what's been done, and I think this is our best chance to resolve it. It may not be everyone's happy with it, but we'll get a lot more people happy with this process as opposed to perhaps what has happened historically.
The letter we got from the Minister talked about not entertaining rural living, but there's a little caveat in there, at this time, okay? At this time. So I'm just concerned that we're actually taking off the table rural living when there's that caveat in that letter.
Final comment on that one is that the Minister has issued residential rural living guidelines. It's part of a regional context as to what supply looks like. There's plenty of areas surrounding Gawler as well, as you know, with extensive rural living. We'll work our way through the detail early in the new year, I think. Yep.
Is there any other discussion? Councillor Hennessy.
If I may, having attended at least one of the community meetings in the last 12 months, I must admit, I hear your concerns, Councillor Koch, but I think they're actually self-managing now, some of those squeaky wheels within it. And I think if we continue to liaise, as we are going to, I think we have a much better chance of allowing everyone to have their say without the dominant ones, and we know who they are, so I have faith. I think this community will rise up because they can see, what's happening. And I think a really good engagement plan that Chris has outlined, I have faith. We need to have faith in that and let it run, so.
Councillor White.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I think Chris and staff for their work on the discussion paper and the technical paper needs to be commended. I think it's great. They're both great documents. Lots of research, community engagement has gone into putting these documents together in the first place. And it's, again, very, very exciting. Look, just to kind of echo some of the comments that have been made, I think I'm very conscious that we want to ensure that this submission to be backed by the community. We want to have really good community engagement uptake, and we're very good at that. But I'm also aware that the community in the southern rural areas have gone through extensive consultation in the past, and that a number are also currently working with Mr. Piccolo on their own submission. And I guess what that means is for any, sort of an ordinary person down there, asking to submit their feedback on one item and then on another, that's going to be a challenge, I think, for us. I don't think that's necessarily impossible, but I think it definitely will be a challenge, because if I was on board with a plan and then all of a sudden another plan came my way from the Gawler Council, when I thought, hang on a sec, who's running the show here? That will be the sort of questions that people may be asking themselves. So I think that's probably just important to keep in mind. I think the scope of the area in the southern rural areas where we'll be doing this engagement is fantastic, and the fact that it's zone specific is, commend staff on that, because it makes perfect sense to be able to engage on what is relevant to where you live. But I just think we need to keep in mind that there may be a sense of exhaustion and a lack of progress, maybe for lack of a better term, when we're doing these engagements. So it's just probably good to keep that in mind. I don't quite know what the solution is, but I would suggest one of those is just open communication with our community and say, hey, yes, maybe we haven't got it perfect in the past, but this is what we have as it stands. Here's our facts. This is what we're thinking. We'd love your feedback on that. And this is something we know the state government want to pursue in the near future, so we'd really love to have your say on it. So I think using some of that open, clear communication and being honest with our community is going to be essential. But all in all, I'm very, very excited to hear what the community has to say and see this progress.
Do you wish to wrap up the debate? Because you were the mover, did you speak then? No? Okay, we'll go ahead then.
Can I speak now?
Yeah.
I received a letter from the department saying that councils will run the community engagement, and I think that anyone can put in a submission, which is really encouraging, and if Mr Piccolo is representing landholders, I think that's a really good thing. So I think we'll get lots of feedback. However, the letter made it very clear that it has to be a council-run process. So, and I think that's appropriate. I think that is very, very appropriate, and I'd like to thank Chris Hannaford for his work and Andrew for your work, and whoever else was involved in working up the different zones. I think they work, and I'd like to hear what the outcome of the discussions with the department, because there's lots of opportunity there, I think, and I think that might actually be a bit of a game changer, I think. Yeah, so it is a council-run process, and that comes from the department. Yeah.
Is there any other discussion? If not, I can put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. We've done 6.4, and so we've got 2 information reports which we can move either in bulk or on block. Do you wish to speak?
I want to talk about the street tree planting. I'm really quite disappointed with these trees. I was told that they were poisoned. They weren't poisoned. They weren't planted properly. And in our report, and I'd like to thank Grant Hemmerling for the very good report, it says that the trees are under stress and even high stress. And it's the way they've been planted. They were externally, we paid nearly $300,000 for these street trees, and it was given to an external operator, I believe. And I think it's a real shame that we're now having to fix up their mistakes. It is their mistakes, and I just find I walk that road twice a week, and there was no forward planning for planting trees. We've cut into the walkway, and I accept that we have to do that. We have to do that to ensure that the trees actually grow. They're drowning. When they planted them, they actually planted them and they drowned, and that's why they died. They weren't poisoned. They were drowned. They were drowning, and I'd really like to see our staff, get in and if they can fix it, see if they can fix it. But I'm not sure if they can. It really is very, very disappointing that we spent nearly $300,000. I don't know if you remember the amount, but it was a huge amount, wasn't it? And it is exceptionally disappointing to see them dying. Anyway, that's all I'll say about that.
You wish to second the motion? Yep.
I've actually got a different view to the Mayor. I've actually think there was an issue around the design of the planting holes. And when I look at page 306 of 320, when I look at that, that confirms my fears that I had when I actually saw them and looked at them and did my little tests and everything else. That the specifications, I think, were not to industry standards. And in fact, when it actually came to council all those years back, I had those fears, but it was already signed off, so I could say nothing or do anything. The main issue is when the holes were dug, and I did see them, they used a backhoe, dig, and that causes glazing of the walls of the actual holes, right? And you need to then break those walls up with a jackhammer or something like that and get rid of the glaze. Because what you do is when you put the excavator in, the clay particles shear against each other and it creates an impervious layer. And I don't know whether they actually did break it all up, or the sides and the bottom. Otherwise, the roots just can't get out. You create this hard well, basically. The other issue is it was backfilled with topsoil, and when I actually looked at it and everything else, it was actually quite organic in nature. It wasn't a loam or anything. But the usual industry standard is to dig out the hole, break up the sides, and then mix some emollients with the existing soil, which is your backfill around the plant, because you need the natural soil to create the mechanical force in the ground for the roots to bind into, and then you need to break the glazing to allow the roots to move out into the natural soil to give you the actual the strength. Because as the roots grow, they go out and they bind into the natural soil. Because it was fluffy organic soil, there's no mechanical strength in that for the roots to bind into. That's why the roots never went anywhere. And I think it looks like to me they were overwatered, so they were actually drowning by overwatering. And also the stakes were too tight, and the ties were too tight. Because what happens is, as trees are coiled springs, and as they go round like this, they don't go backwards and forwards, they go round, that creates the hormonal response in the tree to then send out the roots in the right direction. So if the wind's coming from a certain area, the tree will do this, and it'll put more roots over here. So if it's over there on the road there, it'll be sitting there doing this, and it will then be sending out all the hormones and everything else to set the roots out to go in the right direction. And now they couldn't, because I imagine those planting holes were glazed, and then also because the soil was too fluffy. But this is the specs that they were given. So the contractors were given this spec. They've just gone with the specs. That's the real issue for me, and I don't know where we go from here. I really don't, because potentially the trees in the middle were probably the wrong. I assume that they knew that they were the right trees when that came through. Obviously, because these guys I thought they had more, understanding of the soils and everything else.
Well, we can get Wendy to...
Yeah, so anyway, that's my concern, is that the specifications that were given were wrong, in my opinion. That's it, yep.
Yeah, through the chair, I think Councillor Quash makes a whole suite of very valid points there, and as did you, Mayor Redmond. I actually think it's a combination of a whole heap of factors. Again, you know, this is all pre my involvement. I think, you know, being brutally honest, I think the tree planting was an afterthought in the overall consideration of the road, and I think probably consideration of how you would plant these trees in. There are metres and metres of compacted fill under the link road, and we've had other issues with the planting in the medians up in the Springwood site, where Councillor Koch is correct that you can't hit natural ground because there's so much compacted fill, and then where the pits aren't timed, so where they're not scratched out at the bottom or around the sides, it has in places created almost a bathtub. Now, the influence of overwatering, I'm not going to comment on. I believe from the independent arborist report that the drowning has been more influenced by the La Nina weather events and the drainage of stormwater. There's also commentary from the independent arborist about the quality of the original tree stock. Now, I've got to say, I find that surprising because the contractor who's done these works is actually a highly reputable contractor, and they do a whole heap. We've worked with them on so many projects, so I can try and explore what happened there. The plants we've replanted recently, they are stock that were provided by that contractor, and we know because our independent arborist inspected them all that they were of really high quality. And thus they have been planted with a slightly different planting methodology. And I think the way forward is, I think we shouldn't panic. I think we need to look at how the trees perform from here. We are saying we're expecting there to be some more failures. So we're at 14% failure at the moment. We know that there's about 10 that are looking pretty ordinary at the moment. So I think we do have an allowance to be able to keep planting. The radial trenching recommended by the independent arborist is the way forward, but that is a very expensive exercise. And you've got to remember to get the equipment out on site to do that. We're effectively going to have to do road closures. So there's complexities in that as well. We're going into a different weather pattern. Let's have a look at how that influences it as well. It may be that the trees, without the excessive wet weather patterns and poor drainage, might actually stabilise. But I think it is a bit of a watch and see, and I think the most important lesson is that the next time we're doing such a big road intervention that we consider tree planting as part of the initial design, because had we planted the trees on the opposite ends of the drainage and had negotiated land boundaries to accommodate that, we'd probably be in a much better position. So, you know, hindsight's a wonderful thing. I'm just going to say, not for a second do I doubt the intent of the original staff and contractors. I think they have been forced into trying to deliver in a highly ideal space for healthy tree growth.
Thanks. Councillor Hughes?
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Koch, and thank the staff. I just think that the contract specifications are definitely an issue. Also, advanced tree planting has to be 100% right, otherwise the trees die. It's really high risk planting advanced trees. So if you look at the recent plantings that Tea Tree Gully have done, they're all smaller, and it's a lot cheaper. You actually get really rapid growth. I wouldn't. Every time I see advanced plantings, I do worry. There is a high failure rate, even with good tree stocking, and just everything has to be so perfect. They can sulk for years too. They might not take off as well. So you could do everything right and they still sulk. Smaller plantings, smaller specimens, getting specifications right, yeah, it's just so frustrating because so much money's been spent. A lot of the trees do look okay. It's a really windy site. It's just been an incredibly expensive process, and I just hope that the staff have learnt a lot of lessons from it and taken on board.
Is there any other discussion? Councillor Samble?
Yeah, thanks, Mr Chairman. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. The one big thing, everything that's been said, I totally agree with Councillor Koch and with it. But what I can't understand, when we as a town of Gawler have got some fantastic people that are very knowledgeable, very professional, you know, and they want to do things to make sure that things look good in our town. And I'm talking about Milton Vidoulis. When those plants, when he heard that they were going to cost us $1,000 each, surely you can remember that when it came to council? $1,000 each for a tree. And he said, you must be joking. I could sell this same tree for $300, you know, and I'd even plant them and so forth. He suggested it, but nothing was done. Nobody ever came back to him. I just get a little bit lost about this sort of thing when these people are in our community and we do not use them. And when I say we're not using them up, but they want to make sure that it's great. A common thing that people are reporting to me, that section of road, wouldn't it have been lovely to see a display of trees, the whole length of that, the same type, in certain colour? Well, like my wife loves jacaranda trees. Can you imagine that at the moment, the way jacarandas are all lit up? But no, it was done, and somebody said, no, we'll put that tree. It was interesting, we came down there on Sunday, and my wife said, what sort of trees are they? There's a beautiful one there flowering. There's one there not flowering. There's one there dead. All this sort of stuff. I'm not sure, I can't put my head around this sort of thing. As Councillor Koch said, you know, like his knowledge of trees over the years and things like that, he was never ever listened to, you know. And
we're 1 minute away from automatically ending the meeting, so
I'm only half a minute away. I just hope that the $27,520 is not going to be what it's going to cost to have those trees stay alive. Because I can't believe there's no dripper system put in there. So, as it was said before, it wasn't done right. So, you know, $12,000 annually and $1,500 to do a pruning of the tree. That's pretty expensive to prune a tree. No, I'm very disappointed in the way that's been done.
So, well, if no one else wants to speak, we can just finish the motion. Who seconded it? Oh, Councillor Koch seconded it. Mayor, are you happy to put the motion? All those in favour? Carried unanimously. As this is a special meeting, we don't have motions without notice and all that other stuff, so we do close the meeting at 10:30. It's obviously look, it's been a whirlwind meeting, but there's so many important things in here. It would be much more concerning if we finished this at 7:30 and just didn't care about the future of our town. So thanks to everyone for the lively discussion.